But the telecom companies weren't forced to offer flat rate deals to get people to take up internet services.
They had a race to the bottom.
They had a race to the bottom, and this is a problem. It's the structure of the market. It's an issue for if that's the problem. If they can't make money from charging their customers are not Netflix. Netflix is somebody that that's doing them a favour by providing the content that people want to use on their broadband networks. If you didn't have Netflix, nobody had a broadband subscription anyway. Yeah.
Well. Slight exaggeration.
But
it's a big driver.
Internet companies are the reason people have broadband connections. The reason they have high-speed broadband connections are for high-speed internet content.
Yes, as opposed to just surfing the web.
If we just wanted to surf the web, we'd all be using dial-up, right?
Yeah. Hello and welcome to another Telecoms.com podcast. We're back in the studio. The last one was Amsterdam, wasn't it? God, that seems like ages ago already.
This has been a very long week.
Yeah.
And a wet one.
And a wet one, yes. Yeah, so something we'll come back to, because it'll be our lead segment was an evening that we spent with Vodafone hearing about some news from them, and then at the end of it, when we were leaving, it just twatted it down.
Yeah.
I mean, it was like tropical.
Got back and looked like I've been swimming in all my clothes,
right.
literally.
Yeah, I
really
see.
Bad.
It was in sort of southern bit of Covent Garden, just off, is it the Strand there?
Yeah.
And for me, to get back to Hitchin, it's easier for me to come to, like where I do for this, to Blackfriars Station. But that's about a 20-minute walk. You have to go over Waterloo Bridge along the South Bank. And luckily I had an umbrella. And I also always buy these bit of free advertising. These shoes, the brand is Braysher, and basically they're walking shoes.
Good
but
name.
Yeah,
Solid.
I think it's actually named after a bloke whose surname was Braysher. And they do all those proper full-on walking shoes that that are boots and all that.
Like
but
Merrill.
You what?
Merrill.
Yeah, that sort of brand. Yeah. But then they also do these ones that look like normal shoes, but they've got all the waterproofing.
Yeah.
And I promise you, I mean, they were soaked through, and not a molecule of water got through. So. Fair play to Braysher. They cost a few quid, over 100 quid for a pair, but I just like to have shoes that can handle anything.
Your weight.
They proved themselves that night, because and I had my umbrella.
Yeah.
But you and like Ray was out, and you just all got completely soaked, yeah?
Yeah. I mean, we didn't come with umbrellas, unfortunately.
Right.
I mean, Keith Dyer was the worst. Someone that we know works for
Yeah.
the mobile network. Give his slight little plug, but he just came out in a jumper. Literally,
right?
He looked like it's
not even a coat.
like a warm spring.
And he was
evening.
walking with you,
and he
was
was. Well, he was. I don't know where he was going. He said he could get a bus, but he got a bus on Waterloo Bridge, and hopefully it dropped him right at his house, because
Right.
otherwise he'd have ended up absolutely. I mean, even worse than we were. But,
Well, you don't seem to have pneumonia, so that's good news. So yes, that's a thing we've been up to since Amsterdam. Having finally got back. God, that was a bore getting back as well. KLM, they made us sign all these forms and upload all these documents before we even got our boarding pass. And then even with our boarding pass, we had to go to a special gate and sign some more forms and documents. And I was half expecting a doctor to say, "Pull your pants down."
I didn't get any of this with BA.
Okay, why are you feeling my area up? What's that got to do with coronavirus? Well,
Yeah, it
you know
was
what those
difficult.
crazy Dutch are like.
Shanta.
But no, there was none of that. It was just yet more hassle, and I was just relieved to get home. And I've just vowed to never leave the country again, if I'm honest.
We'll never go to the Netherlands again. Never go to Schiphol Airport again.
Yeah, well, Schiphol it makes Heathrow look compact.
Yeah.
I didn't have any of this with BA. We had a gate to walk to that was quite far, but once you
So I think there's extra aggro with KLM then, maybe.
you went through,
Because
it was-
EasyJet didn't give a toss. They're like, go for it. And by the way, do you want to buy some expensive stuff on the flight?
Yeah.
That's about it.
Oh, they all do that nowadays.
Yes. I know everyone's a budget airline now, aren't they?
Sir, you
Yeah.
smell. Would you like some perfume?
So yes, but that was all good fun. So yeah, now we're back in the studio. No guest. We're hoping to have a guest next week, which is hopefully going to be Dean Bubley, who's we've mentioned him quite a few times on the pod.
We have.
He's a regular listener. He's an analyst, but he's very much cut from a similar cloth as us in that he shoots from the hip,
Yeah.
calls it like it is. And so hopefully we'll have a good chat. We'll probably just spend most of the time on a telecoms podcast talking about how shit the telecoms industry is, which should be fun. We'll see what feedback we get on that. Anyway, better crack on. By the way, I thought we'd have cheeky G&T to start with this time. I was just in Co-op buying the usual punks, I spotted these, and people are going to think I'm getting sponsored. It's Sipsmith brand. The reason I buy them is because it's a proper G&T. It's about 7.3%. When I mix a G&T
Blimey.
at home,
It's 45.
I'm going about a quarter gin to 3/4 tonic, so that'll make it about 10%, won't it?
I always do a third to 2/3.
Well, there you are. So you're more
Yeah.
like sort of 15% then.
Yeah.
But then when you buy like the Gordon's one, like look, one we got here from when Elena was here, I bet you that's just about 5%. Yeah, it is exactly 5%.
Well, this is.
7.3.
I applaud Sipsmith.
It's a bit better, isn't it? So that's why I thought I'd get it. So cheers, mate.
Yeah, cheers.
Yes, what are we going to talk about? We're going to start by talking about the Vodafone stuff. So that's 2 Vodafone events we've had now. I think we can thank our former colleague for this. He's just gone in there and gone, you better take journalists out and get them pissed more.
Do you know what
'Cause that's what
Vodafone
works
used to
for
be a few years ago? Quite hard to get things out of. I always thought not useless, but they were never that
Responsive.
that responsive. And it's interesting that like you get a couple of PR people in that are fairly active and engaged, and
Yeah.
it's really changed it.
No,
Yeah.
credit to Jamie. He's probably got stuck in.
Jamie and Howard and
Howard, what's his name? Simon, who was there as well.
Simon Gordon was out
Yeah.
the other night as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I ended up chatting to Simon about metal music.
Yeah.
I noticed he had some tattoos. I thought he likes a bit of metal. That
He had the
bloke.
right kind of beard for metal.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, no, that's all good. And I was sat next to one Vodafone exec, so I took the trouble to tell him I thought Jamie was doing a good job. So that's another beer you owe me, Jamie.
Yeah, we both got good seats actually, didn't we?
Yeah, we
On
did
a
all
very
right. I
long
was
table.
a bit towards the end. I felt a bit sorry for the consumer journalist, the Tech Radar, whatever he is, lad who was next to me,
Yeah.
John. I've forgotten his surname. Yeah, he was a bit in the wilderness, so I
Yeah.
ended up chatting to him quite a lot. And it was also good to see Rory Cletheland-Jones out, who's the BBC guy who hasn't had too much luck with his health recently. So it's good to see him out,
Yeah.
having a laugh. So anyway, that's the first thing that we're going to chat about, but not just the evening. Although food was all right, wasn't it?
It was really nice.
Yeah.
It was very good.
But the news that accompanied it, which also ended up being the most read story of the week for Telecoms.com, so that's all fine. And any other conversations we had with execs,
Yeah.
I've got to admit, I'm so bad at my job. You know, they were doshing out gin and tonics, red, white wine, all that sort of thing. So I don't have a very clear recollection of the chats I did have with the exec I was sat next to. A chap called Yago, was it Tenorio?
Yeah.
Yeah, a Spanish guy.
He's head of network strategy.
Head of network strategy. He seemed like a sound bloke.
Yeah, he's
I just, other than knowing that I had a nice chat with him, I can't remember the details. So I might hand over to you on the specifics. And then we're going to move into, I mean, one of the themes that we're going to talk about in Vodafone is the doing it yourself tech-wise versus getting other people to do it.
Yeah.
And it's obviously a consistent theme of this podcast. You've written a thing this week, a more sort of an opinion analysis piece on it, haven't you? And then there was also a little bit of news from Danielle, who was on the pod a few weeks ago. She just suddenly come out with $1 billion, as she does.
Yeah.
I tell you what, I mean, look, fair play. Thanks a lot for this, Danielle, but you could clearly have afforded even better. Only joking. I'm very grateful. So that just gets us on to talking about public cloud pros and cons. You know, episode 20
Yep.
or whatever of that one, and then we're going to finish off. I wrote a little bit of news this morning, which seemed to have got some traction about how Huawei and other Chinese companies got put on a blacklist by Trump, where American companies weren't allowed to do business with them. Turns out that they've just been doshing out licenses left, right and centre, and they've done billions of dollars of business with American companies anyway. So I just wrote a bit just going, what was the point of that then?
Yeah.
And
although they've clearly suffered at the same time, so it must
well,
be...
they have suffered, yeah. It is more nuanced than that, and there is some symbolism to it. But in terms of, you know, it's obviously nowhere near the severe, absolute blacklist that it was painted to be. And that we might talk a bit more generally about the sort of US versus China geopolitical fun. So yes, that's that. Just to remind you that if you're watching it on the website or on YouTube or on Facebook, you can also listen to it on iTunes, SoundCloud, Spotify, and loads of other podcasting platforms.
Yeah.
Okay, so Vodafone, they took us to nice dinner. Smith and Walensky, was that it?
Yeah, I think that's the
Which
name
is
of
a steak place.
it. You could get other things,
You
but
could get
it was mainly
other.
steak.
Did you have the steak?
Well, I wasn't going to order a risotto.
Do you know what I mean?
And I'm not really into fish.
I'd say it was fillet steak, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It was probably not unlike what you had in Amsterdam, Pierre.
Nice.
It was better than the one I had in Amsterdam. I put it like that.
Yeah.
Even the second one.
That steak, even the second one, wasn't one of the best steaks I've had, I have to say, especially for the price.
Right.
Especially because it was called the best restaurant in
I
Amsterdam.
mean, the two I had
Was it?
subsequently, the one at Hawksmoor and this one, were both better
Yeah.
than the one in Amsterdam.
No surprise.
Oh yeah, shout out to Sunny from Ericsson. She took us out day after we got back from Amsterdam. Went for a nice
That's
steak
why it
with
seems
her.
so long since we've done a podcast,
Yeah,
because
that's
it was a little bit over a week ago.
And she's probably started maternity leave now.
Yeah.
So best wishes to you, Sunny. Hope it all goes well. And when she gets back, she's doing some kind of CSR type of role.
Yeah.
So I said she'll have her work cut out with me on that one. Anyway, so we had a nice steak. What did I have for a starter? I can't remember. Oh, salmon, smoked salmon. That was nice.
I see.
And had some cheese. But the purpose of it wasn't just to treat us to a nice dinner. The purpose of it was to talk about. I was a bit surprised actually because Jamie had gone. There's going to be some big news there, and I was like, okay.
Yeah.
And it's strategic, and I thought maybe they're going to announce that they've got into fast food or something.
Yeah.
And in the end, he was just sort of going on about how they're going to hire a few software engineers. I was like, okay, when are you going to get to the news?
Yeah.
Turns out that was the news.
Yeah.
But, and I'll hand over to you here, because afterwards, when I was writing it up, I was sending you on our little Teams thing, I was sending you a thing going, was that a bit of an anticlimax? And then you sort of put me straight and went, on the surface, yeah, but once you dig into it,
Yeah.
it's more profound. So it seems appropriate for me to sort of let you narrate the substance of it.
Yeah, I mean, I agree, on the surface it doesn't, especially because it's not actually that much of an increase in staff numbers, I don't think.
Because
I mean, there was this
bunch of internal retraining, isn't there?
Yeah, I mean, the headline on the press release was we're sort of recruiting 7,000 new software engineers, which makes you think, whoa, this is like a massive job creation scheme, brilliant, everybody's...
Do you know what Vodafone Group's total headcount is off the top of your head?
Hold that thought.
Let me look that up while
I thought
chat.
you were such a pro that you just know it straight away.
Well, yeah. I
You
mean,
keep a notepad.
Yeah. He's just
Yeah.
firing up on his phone.
I've got it on my phone because I included it in my story. But I think
Okay.
that the point about the 7,000 is that it's mainly internal retraining.
Well, he was asked a question, wasn't he, Johan? So the most senior Vodafone person at dinner was Johan Weiberg, who's their overall CTO, isn't he?
Yeah.
This tall
Well,
Swedish
I
lad.
couldn't get. I mean, I did notice, because you look around at what other people have written, don't you? And I noticed both Reuters and Keith, actually, we just mentioned the mobile network, seem to have a figure for the sort of net increase. And I think Reuters was suggesting 700 new, so sort of only 700 of those.
Right.
So 7,000, and they're saying only 700 will be recruited externally. And Keith had a figure of about 1,600. So,
Right.
but I wasn't. I mean, those figures, I think they were probably both sitting nearer than I was to Johan Weiberg as a CTO.
Well,
who
there was a specific question that asked about the proportion, and he slightly dodged it and just sort of gave an indication rather than a number.
Yeah.
And I think he indicated that the majority were going to be retraining rather than
He said
fresh
more
jobs.
than 50%.
Yeah, but so
I
that
think,
could be 3,000.
So that's 3,500. But then
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of insourcing of contractors as well.
What does that even mean?
Well, it means that they're actual. If you look at how they say how many people they employ, you get sort of FTEs, as they call it, only full-time employees who
Right.
are sort of fully on a Vodafone contract, and then they have a lot of operators have had staff that sort of work all the time for them, but they're like full-time
they're on contract
contractors, so they're
basis.
not. Almost like
So
working for
insource-
Uber, I suppose, or
So
something.
does insourcing mean turning a contractor into an
Yeah,
employee?
yeah.
Right.
So in a way, you could say it's not really growing the size of the workforce because they already use those people.
So it's a bit,
kind of
you get the
thing,
impression there's a bit of
you know.
smoke and mirrors there.
So, I mean, you wanted the figures though, and I've got them here. So they have 96,500 employees last year. They did have 111,700 in 2015. So they've cut about 15,000
Right.
jobs.
So sorry,
But
what was the today's headcount again?
Today's headcounts, well, this is the end 2020 financial year,
Okay.
which I think for them is March 2021.
Right, so pretty recent.
So they're on 96,500.
Okay, so 7,000. If it was all pure additions, that would be growing the company by like 8%.
It would, but it's not.
But it's not.
I mean, we're talking about, so it's probably going to be, let's say it's 1,000 or something. Let's go for the middle of what Reuters and the mobile network said and say it's about 1,000. But the thing is, I mean, I was sitting next to Scott Petty, who's Chief Digital Officer, and I couldn't get a figure out of him. I said to him, does this mean overall headcount is going to go up? And he was talking about technology, I think, specifically the technology team. And he said, yes, it will go up a bit. But the benefit is in other areas, because they obviously they're always looking for savings and efficiency, and that's part of what this is all about. If you look outside the technology team, my expectation would be that they carry on going down in those areas because, I mean, some of the things they're using these software guys for are things like automation.
Right.
Yeah. Automation of network functions and
which necessarily makes other roles redundant.
I mean operators will always downplay that. It's like the whole. I mean,
there's fun to bring it up.
There's even a very consumery side to it. And I can ask Scott Petty about this. They had this program a couple of years ago. They made a big deal about in the UK called Code Ready, where they wanted to and this is sort of ties in with what they were talking about, retraining. In this case, customer service assistants, people that you wouldn't think the operators would try to retrain to be coders, offering them the opportunity to retrain to work on things like chatbots and stuff like that. And since they announced it, and I think I wasn't the only one who's quite sceptical about how this would work out when they announced it. They haven't really said anything at all. Then I've asked them a few times, how's Code Ready going? They've never really had a clear answer on it. And Scott Petty insists it's going really well. He says it's been quite successful. We've got people who were doing customer service jobs who are now sort of doing basic programming, all sort of top level stuff
that's positive. If that was happening a lot,
if that can happen, then that's great. But I think the important thing, digging beneath that sort of top stuff about adding more. I mean, for a start, the software team's obviously going to go up massively. Regardless of how much the organisation grows or shrinks, you're going to end up with. I think they've got 9,000 people at the moment on software who are classed as sort of software engineers. Yeah. So you're going up to 16,000, and it's like, why do they need so many software engineers at a telecom operator?
That is the question.
And it's all about sort of cutting the amount that they spend on systems integrators, basically, and IT
I think
companies.
the other part of the angle on their press release was the whole digital transformation bit, and about how they've got to get better at creating novel digital products to not be a dumb pipe and to take.
I personally think that's. I don't think it's bollocks, but I don't think that's the most important thing.
Okay, fair enough.
I mean, this whole thing about we're going to create new IoT services and we're going to do spin.
They'll probably try.
I mean, look, telcos have been talking about doing things like that for 20, 30 years or whatever it seems, and not 30, but certainly 20 years, and they've never really sort of.
I like to remind Vodafone people, especially ones who've been there for a long time, about a thing called Vodafone 360. Right. Which was about 15, 20 years ago, and it was a massive above-the-line marketing spend, and it's all about this sort of digital transformation as it was then. Yeah. Them trying to redefine themselves as more than the dumb pipe, and it just fell flat on its face. Completely waste of time.
So I think the main thing is that a lot of the stuff that they would buy from, and Scott Petty specifically called out these names, people like Accenture, IBM, TCS, Amdocs he even mentioned. I mean, I said to him, how much do you spend with these companies? And at the moment, and he said, well, he didn't have a figure, but it's massive how much telcos spend
SI
with
spend in general.
SI spending. And I looked through Accenture's revenues, for instance. I didn't realise the systems integrators, he was saying after financial services, telco is probably their biggest sector.
Wow.
And they so Accenture alone made 10 billion last year from clients in the kind of telecom, communications, media sectors, basically.
We're in the wrong job, mate.
And basically, Vodafone wants to cut what it's spending on them. It wants to develop that capability itself, and it obviously sees some kind of economic benefit in doing that. And then I guess the other thing is that you kind of own the IP, don't you? You own the...
Yeah, so that's true. That was another big part of it, which sort of feeds into our
which is a cost saving as well.
Public cloud sort of thing.
You're not paying licensing fees, so you're cutting money that way. And you own it.
There's the sort of robustness and the autonomy. And that's what I put in the headline. My headline was Vodafone creates 7,000 new software jobs in bid for IT autonomy.
Completely, yeah. And the cloud thing's the other interesting aspect of it, really, because and that was touched on in the sort of preamble, and then I tried to dig into that a little bit more, because I'd written about this during the week. We'll come on to this in more detail, but we talk about this all the time, the difficulty of, the thing about being tied to one big kind of cloud. One thing it seems they want to do with this big software program they've got is to develop this, they're calling it TaaS, Telecom as a Service, like a platform, an open platform. You kind of develop microservices and tool things from the beginning. That means that you then have workloads you can move around more easily. You could take them off the private cloud and put them into AWS.
Yeah. Well, that's supposed to be the point of virtualization and cloudification, is this portability and
completely
scalability.
But then it's this issue of you put it into AWS. You don't want it to always have to be in AWS. And if you wanted to take it out and put it in another public cloud, that's doable, because that's something people have said is But that's the aspiration. That, and I was asking him about. It's very, very clear they don't want to be dependent on a big sort of, public cloud. I mean, I brought up the whole Open RAN issue. Isn't it a bit ironic that telcos make such a big deal about, dependency on three big RAN vendors, and yet there doesn't seem to be the same concern. I mean, I know they're not used as much at the moment, but it's going that way about the public clouds. And they're clearly one of the operators that wouldn't want to do something, and he said this on the record, so wouldn't want to do the sort of thing that AT&T's done.
Yeah, or Dish.
With putting your whole sort of, or especially, Dish is greenfield, so it's a little bit different.
Remind me, I'm sure I wrote it up, but remind me what AT&T's done in the public cloud.
AT&T's done a 5G, well, they're doing it. They're moving all their 5G network stuff, basically, the functions, anything they can on the 5G network into the public cloud with
AWS?
Microsoft Azure.
Oh, it's Microsoft Azure.
And he, when I said to him, what about Dish? The one that he actually sort of immediately responded by going, well, actually, the one that we looked at was AT&T with Microsoft Azure, and I think his words, I don't think I'm misquoting him, he said that's too risky, you're basically outsourcing a core competency.
So he, without knowing whether or not he ever reads Telecoms.com or light reading, he pretty much goes with our sense of wariness about it all. While at the same time, I'm sure, and if he listened to this pod, he'd be thinking, oh God, are these guys going to put me in hot water with the hyperscalers, which he presumably doesn't want to be.
Well, I don't think that we will, because it's business for them, isn't it? And I don't think
there's anything wrong with a bit of healthy wariness, which is like, of course we're going to do business with you, of course we're going to get you to do some stuff. Yeah. But we're gonna hedge our bets.
Exactly, and I think that for me was like, so beneath the whole 7,000 software engineers, the big things for me were, like you said, IT autonomy. Not having to sort of be overly reliant on systems integrators, and this cloud thing I thought was really crucial, because if this does give them a sort of tool that means they're not going to be bound to one public cloud, I think that's the sort of thing that all the operators should be doing, to be quite honest with you, and thinking about now. And I said I was saying how easy is it to do that, because everybody says, and again we'll come on to this, but everybody's been saying it's quite hard to move things around. And he said, well, you've got to think about it at the start. He says if you don't have this sort of initiative that they've got with this TaaS, as they call it, you get developers who basically just code directly for AWS without thinking about developing a microservice that can be moved around.
So there needs, ultimately, in the future, there needs to be some kind of, I don't really hear the word middleware used that much anymore. Maybe it doesn't apply so much to the cloud, but there needs to be some kind of middle layer of format that you code into, that is just as compatible with AWS and Azure and Google Cloud.
Exactly.
But apart from the fact that, and obviously the market would be there for it if it was possible, and there are countless big software companies that could get into that. Even someone like Oracle, who has their own cloud aspirations, could get into that. The big encumbrance to that it reminds me a little bit of what it's like, for example, with Windows versus Mac OS back in the 80s. Windows had every incentive to make things like Office poorly compatible with Mac OS, because they wanted people to go, I would have gone with a Mac, but I need Office, so fuck it, I went with Windows instead. Yeah. And you can just imagine, while they would never admit it, and I'm sure, if we had people from AWS or whatever on here, they'd go, yes, we strongly believe in compatibility across the cloud and all that sort of thing. Deep down, among the more moustache twirling strategic types, they'd be like, no, let's middleware, let's make it as difficult as possible. Well, it remains
to be seen how easy it is to do, doesn't it? Because and I'm sure if you talk to people who, like Daniel Royston has said this to me before, at Telco DR, that it's benefits when you just sort of go all in with it. You get, the efficiencies are kind of correlate with.
Well, she said that on the pod.
There's an effort here, isn't there, involved in obviously in doing what Vodafone. I mean, this is the big thing for me actually is. How easy is it to do what they're talking about doing? They want to recruit 7,000 software engineers. Maybe a lot of that's retraining. Okay, but for a start, can you retrain people internally to do high-level software jobs? How easy is it to do that?
Well, that's a big question for the whole of society, isn't it?
It is, and I mean, I know Vodafone's a very technical company, and they've got extremely smart people on who perhaps aren't from a software background. They've maybe worked with hardware. Maybe it's easier with those guys, but it still sounds like a fairly challenging thing to do that amount of retraining. And then also retraining is massively costly, yeah? To have people, you've got to build in time for those people to be not doing their normal day jobs and being retrained.
Yeah, so there's got to be top-down, so you can have Johan talking a good game about this stuff, but then he's got to percolate that culturally throughout the whole...
And then if they're not getting that many externally, right, they're not, let's say it is only 1,000... Are they getting the best people? Indeed. Are they getting the people that they need?
They're competing with
you're going out there at the moment where there's a lot of young guys coming through universities who are extremely smart, who I think it's going to be tough for retrained individuals at Vodafone potentially to keep up with, Not because they're stupid, that's just the way the world is, isn't it? It's like sport, there's always somebody coming along who's 10 years younger than you and a lot better.
Yeah, well, I always find the cultural side of, when people talk about transformation and change management and all that sort of thing, I find culture really interesting anyway. When I'm not talking about telecoms, I find just the current state of craziness in sort of public culture in UK, US, elsewhere, fascinating. But culture within organisations, like we've commented on this, within Informa. Informa's not primarily a journalistic company, and that's never been bad for me. But it has meant that, I don't know, I've just felt that the people are more concerned with other stuff. That I felt that journalistic, we kind of go under the radar a little bit. And again, I stress, I'm careful not to bemoan that too much because there's worse things than not being constantly micromanaged. But that's one example of culture, and then within telecoms, their culture, a lot of their culture is going to be closer to a utility than a sort of whizzy Silicon Valley, sort of fail fast DevOps type of situation.
Completely.
And turning that cultural supertanker around is difficult. That's why I actually said in my story, I was talking about they've got this group. There's got this group called Vodafone Technology.
Well, that's the technology team.
Yeah. And I said creating dedicated ring fence functions such as Vodafone Technology would seem to be a sensible approach to sort of dealing with this cultural thing.
Yeah.
So rather than just trying to sort of inflict it on everyone, you've got this sort of techie incubator bit. They come up with stuff. They're sitting there with their flasks and their explosions, and they come up with clever stuff. And then the tricky bit then is then persuading the rest of the company. Like I think I said, in my final paragraph I said, assuming they're successful, the next challenge would be persuading other parts of the business to incorporate them into their commercial offerings. And then I finished by saying, then all they got to do is compete with US tech giants for consumer digital spend.
Yeah.
But that middle bit, I think it's right to ring fence it and have a bit that's got a different culture within it that it can cultivate it, but then you've still got to translate that culture within the whole business eventually.
I mean, it's quite a new structure, this, by the way. I mean, it's come off I wrote about this back in February. They've basically announced this. Scott Petty used to be head of UK networks, basically, CTO for the UK.
He's only recently moved up.
He's recently moved, so he's now Group CDO, Chief Digital Officer, and they've basically flattened the technology team. They used to have like a technology team for each country that reported to a kind of technology boss in each country, and they've got this new unit, as you say, Vodafone Technology, where one of the things they want to do, and this sounds like a way to realise a lot of efficiencies if it works out well potentially, is to have like a specialist team in Spain, for example, who work on Open RAN software, let's say. And that gets rolled out and it could be used anywhere across the Vodafone footprint, yeah? Whereas what they might have done in the past is have a different team doing that in each country, yeah? Every country looks after its own.
Which makes sense, but then the flip side of centralising is then what if Vodafone Spain doesn't fancy it?
Completely, yeah. And culturally, it's almost harder, isn't it, to do things that way? And
I mean, you could imagine localization and translation. You could have a core sort of thing, and then you've got teams that localize it. But you've still got to persuade the country manager and the senior people within that country that this thing's not a complete fucking waste of time.
I mean, I think it's funny that telcos have these. They go through these phases, don't they? Where all of a sudden regionalising everything, like the way Vodafone's doing, seems like a good idea. Meanwhile, Vion, which tried to have this single platform rolled out across all its markets and was using the same BSS and OSS potentially across them all, has now gone completely the opposite way and says it makes more sense to give each individual country autonomy and let them do their own things because the circumstances are so different in each market.
On the other side thing. Yeah, when Vion's all over the shop, isn't it? It's
they have
Russia
been. I don't think that. Yeah, I mean that's true. There are more, but there's a lot of differences between Vodafone. I mean, Vodafone in Africa is very different from Vodafone in the UK. I mean, even in Europe, you look at some of the stuff in Eastern Europe. I imagine it's quite different requirements from what you have in Spain or whatever.
I'll defer to you on Eastern European expertise as you spend more time. Well, it's more sort of Central Europe, Slovakia, isn't it? But
it's the same thing. It is Eastern Europe, But you can see there's upsides and downsides to it, and there's a lot of challenges. And the other thing is the bit, the bit that they are trying to do outside, in terms of the software recruitment, let's say it's 1,000 people, between 700 and 1,500 or whatever. There's going to be intense competition to get those people at the moment. Yeah, it's the hyperscalers go after these guys, the big banks go after these guys. I mean, anybody really who's thinking digital. I hate the word digital, but for want of a better one, anybody who's thinking advanced internet technology is thinking about getting people like that, and you're going to have to pay them a huge amount of money, to get the best ones. Can they really compete? They don't have. Let's be honest, they don't have the resources of the big tech giants.
I think they've got to really clearly define their realistic objectives.
Yeah.
Okay, they're not going to create the next Instagram.
Yeah.
Or whatever. But
which is why I'm slightly sceptical about the service side of it, and I'm less sceptical about let's use this to make sure things are standardised and that we can move stuff around and to make sure we don't spend too much with systems. So one thing apparently they want to do is Open RAN. Everybody says Open RAN, you're bringing lots of companies into the mix, whereas you used to get it all from Ericsson or Nokia before. And one of the problems with that is it all needs stitching together and make sure that it all works properly.
Yeah.
So there's this talk about systems integrators being needed. To do that, Scott Petty said, we don't want to use systems integrators.
Right.
So we want to do that. So this software thing is partly about that.
I see,
no, that they do the systems integration, yeah?
Right.
So this software thing ties in basically with the Open RAN stuff. Basically, they take care of that side of things. I mean, they probably want stuff that's plug and play as much as possible. But then would they end up
doing stuff like Rakuten is doing, where they come up with something and then they license it?
That's a good question. I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, I didn't get around to talking about that. But
you see, that's why you need me around.
Well, that's a model. Yeah, that Rakuten's done. Why not other telcos do a similar thing? But
do you need another cold on, mate?
I'll have a beer, please.
Got the Yeti open.
We might interview Rakuten next week, actually.
We've got.
When's that?
I mean, Phil.
Oh.
We've got some more gamma ray. We've got got one of Danielle's.
I'll have a gamma ray, please. Thank you very much. Say on the strong stuff.
There we go. Yeah, it makes sense.
I'll
have one as well.
Do you have any crisp with that?
So the Open RAN thing, and it was interesting when Vodafone UK announced its sort of dream team, of Open RAN vendors. I think Samsung was the big one, doing lots of stuff, but there's a few other companies in the mix. There was no systems integrator named, I noticed.
Yes.
There's a few months before this announcement, obviously, but
so the good news for us in terms of our sort of our ongoing narrative is in Vodafone we seem to have one of the clear examples of an operator that is trying to be as autonomous as possible within the current very cloudy, hyperscalery environment. And then we've got others, the extreme opposite end being someone like Dish, who, as you say, is greenfield, but nonetheless they've gone all in with AWS.
Yeah.
To what extent we're going to be able to conclude anything really profound as to who's chosen the better path, I don't know. But it's nice that we've got these two different approaches going.
You're talking about the licensing and making money from this and new services. And when I was chatting to Scott Petty, very much the angle that he was pushing was that this is a cost-saving thing. He was even saying revenues are like that. Costs. We can't keep
Yeah, and revenues for operators like for like have been flat.
They
forever,
can't keep
haven't
spending more with suppliers, kind of thing. Because it's going to end up going. It's going
and
to
they've
end up
had
becoming,
certainly ever since 4G, they've had the old problem of data consumption going through the roof, but they can't charge more for it.
Well, that came up as well, the whole net neutrality thing,
right?
Because that ties into the net neutrality argument, doesn't it? That's the reason that revenues are flat, is because they've basically they didn't charge extra per gigabyte,
no,
and yet they're saying. The big companies like Netflix, which are responsible for increasing levels of traffic, are not contributing anything to that build.
And it's not something we're scheduled to talk about, and I don't want to dwell on it too long, but I only sort of skimmed your analysis piece you wrote on net neutrality. It was about a week ago. But am I correct in assuming that you're unsympathetic to operators?
I wouldn't agree with Scott Petty on that point. No, I didn't sit there at the dinner and get into an argument with him about it. That wasn't really
while
what
you're
to
eating
talk
his
about
steak.
net neutrality. But I just think no one forced telcos to go down that model, to go down that route. It's like saying, publishers are in trouble because everything's become free on the internet and it's completely ruined their business model. Well, it has, but it's just a disruptive thing. It's not like anybody's.
No, and it's a shame for journalism, but it is what it is.
It is, but a lot of them weren't quick in, and this whole, bringing in what they call it, paywalls, and trying to get people to charge. I mean, that's probably happened just far too late, actually.
Which is an increasing pain in the arse for my journalism, I might say.
Right, and yeah, exactly. But the telecom companies weren't forced to offer flat rate deals to get people to take up internet services.
They had a race to the bottom.
They had a race to the bottom, and this is a problem. It's the structure of the market. It's an issue for if that's the problem. If they can't make money from charging their customers are not Netflix. Netflix is somebody that that's doing them a favour by providing the content that people want to use on their broadband networks. If you didn't have Netflix, nobody had a broadband subscription anyway. Yeah.
Well, slight exaggeration.
Or
but it's a big driver.
Internet companies are the reason people have broadband connections. The reason they have high-speed broadband connections are for high-speed internet content.
Yes, as opposed to just surfing the web.
If we just wanted to surf the web, we'd all be using dial-up, right?
Yeah.
So that was pretty slow.
The point I'm making, though, but and therefore
the pain point is streaming video.
The customers are the people who pay to get that content, who pay the operators to enjoy that content. If the operators can't make money out of that, and let's be honest, they're very, very profitable companies. Most of the big operators, we talk about all the problems they've got. Yes, they've got flat revenues. Right. Yes, their costs are high, and they're trying to work out a way to deal with that. And yes, a lot of them are very indebted. But they're not loss-making. They're not loss-making businesses.
No, their problem from a sort of boring old share price thing is...
They're boring utilities.
Well, yeah, and their share price just doesn't go anywhere.
Yeah.
It's just like Vodafone, for example. I think it's actually slightly declined over the past year, and nothing terrible's happened. You just imagine being... what's his name? Nick, the overall CEO? Nick Reed. Yeah, imagine being Nick Reed, and presumably a big part of a CEO of a public company's job is to try and get the fucking share price up.
Yeah, there's different categories of stock, aren't there? You have high growth. You have companies that are expected to do that.
Well, quite.
And then you have utility type arrangements, which appeals to a different class of investor.
But presumably there's still pressure even on Nick Reed to do something about the share price.
And that's when David Hasselhoff buys the Champions League.
That's why they've spun off their...
exactly, Pierre.
A lot of that's to do with this spinning off of the towers, and putting that into a separate kind of asset that they can, get capital for, and it behaves in a different way, hopefully, from the rest of Vodafone Group. But... And it's actually very, it's very valuable, isn't it? Those tower assets have been highly valued. So it seems to, as a kind of form of financial engineering to raise capital and sort out some of the debt problems, perhaps, it makes sense. But I'm not convinced that telcos, just as service companies without that infrastructure, are going to go off on some big
I'm not convinced either. All I'm saying is I can understand why there's the pressure to try or to be seen to be trying. And that's where you get these... That's where you get these left field ideas, like Pierre just said, going off and buying sports rights if you're at BT, or something like that. I'm just trying to put myself in the position of a strategic guy, an operator, and thinking why, because they could just go, and this is a narrative that's been around for a while. They could just go full utility and just go fuck it. We're just going to be the best at providing connectivity, and we're going to be lean and mean, and we're not going to get distracted.
Well, some of them do think that way.
Yeah. But I bet you most of them, to justify their existence, need to come up with a scheme or two, a cunning plan or two every now and then.
But that's probably the same with other They think of themselves. I mean, they're all using that expression "Techco," aren't they, at the moment? From
Telco.
telco to Techco, but it's not new, to be honest.
And CSP to DSP.
They've thought about themselves as technology companies for 20 years, ever since 3G came along, and the internet opportunity with that. They've always liked to regard themselves as tech companies, but they're not really. They're kind of utility firms.
No, well, that's the interesting thing. When you look at their marketing, like, you look at what little marketing someone like a electricity or a water company does, will just be general, sort of generic corporate, sort of tree hugging, we just want the world to be a better place, whatever kind of crap they think they need to spout out with aspirational music in the background. But telcos tend to do something a little bit more specific.
Just read the box there.
Oh, right, yeah. So Pierre's just pointing to the box of these punk IPAs, and it's all about eco stuff and all that sort of thing. And it's like, fair enough. I don't. For the record, I don't want the Earth to be destroyed. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I also don't need a fucking beer company to tell me about that. I need them to get me pissed. Ideally at a controllable rate.
In a green way.
In a carbon negative way.
Ideally in a controllable and tasty way.
In a net zero way.
But telcos have always had slightly different marketing, which is a bit more lifestyle-y.
Yeah.
It's a bit more like trying to integrate themselves more centrally into your lifestyle and into your day-to-day life in the way that other utilities don't. So I agree that at their most basic form they are a utility, but I also understand that they occupy a certain niche of their own that's somewhere between utility and, let's say a technology provider or just a consumer company.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm going to, unless you've got anything else to say on that, I've got one last thought on that evening before we move on to
let's
other
hear your
stuff.
last thought on the evening.
Well, I just thought, so I
the
sat
dessert wasn't very good.
I had cheese. It was nice. It wasn't amazing, but by that stage,
Actually, the dessert was all right.
By
I had
that stage, I was
cheesecake.
giving the red my full attention. I think I even mind-swept someone's sherry, if I remember right.
Oh.
Or was it? It might have been a dessert wine. I was just thinking, what's that? No,
I think I ate
don't
Scott
want that.
Petty's chips. They were sort of between us, and I think I ate half of them, and then I
Vodafone
realised actually that I
CTO's
hadn't even
chips.
ordered any.
They were good
But
chips,
they were-
actually.
well, yeah, I
They were
know.
extra crunchy.
Yeah.
They were like those triple cooked type of things. No, it's the former. I completely, and this is in no way a moan. It's just a sort of stream of consciousness, bit of feedback. I think I always respect any company that gets a bunch of journalists around a table. Everything's on the record. It's a really high risk thing to do.
Yeah.
You've got people like, you had the Bloomberg guy there, you had the FT guy there, you had Rory from the BBC there, and then you got
Well, I don't think
you got scummy little trade press like us there.
who were the ones who gave it coverage. I don't think I'm wondering how much the mainstream news guys felt they got out of it, because I noticed none of them. Reuters was the only
None
one I
hung
could see
around.
that wrote a story on it. Out
Bloomberg
of
guy
all the
was
mainstream coverage, there was
They're so much more professional. The Bloomberg guy's funny, and I like him. I can't remember his name.
Thomas Steele.
Right, I bumped into him a few times, but I was just chatting to him just when I turned up.
Yeah.
And having a bit of a chat, and then within about 2 minutes, he's like, anyway, I'm going to go off and chat to the important people.
Yeah.
And he was just like, he wasn't rude about it, but he was also completely unblinking
Yeah.
and unapologetic about it. And I guess that's why he works at Bloomberg and I work at Telecoms.com. But there we go. I bet Bloomberg hasn't got a podcast like this, has it? No, my thing was the more sort of stage managed bit. So you had Johan up there, and he's got his quite sort of level Swedish delivery.
Yeah.
And I was a bit like, okay, fine. And then Scott, he seemed to be reading from a script and was sort of delivering it quite quickly, like he had a lot to fit into a little bit of time.
Yeah.
And I gave all this feedback to Yago when I sat next to him, because then when it went to Yago, he didn't have a script in front of him, and he was being much more conversational.
He almost got
and
cut
chatty.
off actually as well. He didn't say much, and then was cut off, and everybody started eating. And
That's true.
He
yeah,
was.
he did.
I mean, to be honest with you, he's equally important.
Right.
But it wasn't really his evening. I mean,
see.
he's not the software guy, is he? I know he probably knows software and it's relevant, but he's the guy who's network strategy, Open RAN, things like that.
Right.
Whereas this was about
See, I could have made so much better use of the opportunity I had sitting next to him. but-
this was about I mean, Scott Petty was the man really for this. He was
Right.
he was the sort of person who was sort of leading it really, because it's all about his bit of the
His bit.
business. Yeah.
Anyway, so that was my only feedback. I just thought that it's a bit incongruous. You're set around this nice private room we got.
Yeah.
Nice wine, a couple of G&Ts to kick things off. Maybe that's why I had the idea to get a G&Ts just now. And then everyone's got to go quiet and listen to them read from a script. And it's just sort of slightly incongruous.
Yeah.
But then again, putting myself in their position, I'm not sure how you could do it that differently. You can't just have it be a free-for-all. There has to be some structure.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just found that all a little bit odd. And then we got to the chatty bit at the end, and that was all groovy. But then by that stage, we only had about half an hour left.
Yeah.
And the chatty bit's always the most fun bit, isn't it?
It is, yeah. It was the evening. It went pretty quickly, didn't it? They do go fast those evenings. I think we went out to the pub and they were closed when we tried to get into the one we wanted to go to.
Yeah, we tried to get into the coal dump
hole
or something. Yeah,
coal hole. It's not a dump. I mean,
coal hole's no less dodgy sounding than the coal dump, if you ask me. But there we go. Yeah, and then we went to one other place. Jamie got around in
Wellington.
Jamie's finally got his Vodafone credit card.
Yeah, reluctantly it seemed. Why is he so worried about spending any Vodafone money? He never had that concern about Informer, did he?
I don't remember him even being that worried about it when he was Informer, if I'm honest. No, but he got the round in eventually, so fair enough. And then we all went off and got pissed on.
Yeah.
So that was it. But it's only a minor little observation. I thought it was a great night, and I respect Vodafone for now having 2 proper events.
Yeah.
Given that things have only really started opening up since around the summer, isn't it? And may there be many more. I am definitely enjoying just being out and about and
same.
And just chatting to people. So there we are. Okay, I will move it on. What are we going to talk about next? It is good. Oh yeah. So a big part of the theme of that Vodafone thing, as we've already covered, is that sort of IT autonomy versus what can sometimes feel like a default is like, we're not very good at IT. Let's just hand it off to an SI/hyperscaler.
Yeah.
And there was one thing, one story we both wrote up earlier this week. Our mate Danielle, the provider of Yeti coolers, her company, or one of her 2 companies, came up with an announcement that said, we got $1 billion to just spend on cloud shit.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, exactly how it was stated in the press release.
Yes. She used that terminology.
Exactly. She's been corrupted by the podcast. Now they're going, Danielle, man, why can't you talk like a pro anymore? It's like Scott and Ian, man. They've got in my head. And it's like $1 billion. Damn. And, I wasn't sure from the press release. So it seems to be, and they've created a new company called Skynet or something. What's it called?
Skyvera.
There we are. I got the Sky bit right.
Why Sky? Yeah.
Why Skyvera?
I don't know. Maybe
Who's Vera?
Exactly. Maybe she's got a mate called Vera. Fuck it, I'll call it after you. Well, she's a fan of Vera Lynn.
I've probably got the name completely wrong. I think it's called Skyvera though.
I can go and look it up. But that's basically, so now Danielle's sort of core company is called Telco DR bit being Danielle Royston. And then she's got this Satogi.
Yeah, that's one of
software.
So she's already bought that for 100 million earlier in the year.
Right, so that's wholly run by her and her crew. And so now we got Sky Vera or whatever it is, Sky Dave. And it's got $1 billion. Yeah. And you're just like, fair play. In fact, the photo I even used for Danielle, I just took a screen grab from the pod, actually. And it's headed up by some other bloke called Matt Taylor. It is Skyvera, you're right. And it's
kind of a rebranding of another business.
Yeah, it's a rebranding of the core Telco DR thing, really, isn't it?
Well, I think it's a rebranding of a company called Zephatel.
Well, no, but that was another thing. And I've got to admit, a bit of feedback for you, Danielle. You're probably listening. The press release just left a few. I wasn't entirely sure.
I don't think they want to present
release.
it that way, but I think that's what it is.
So they did say in the press release that they bought assets from Zephatel.
Zephatel was a entity that was started by. It used to be a subsidiary of a venture capital group, private equity group called ESW Capital.
That's it.
Whose founder's a guy called Joe Leamont, I think.
Yeah, and some Texan billionaire.
Yeah, and Zephatel has basically been set up in 2018, and it was doing what Skyvera is basically going to be doing. It was going around and buying smaller
I see.
software companies that are designing for the public cloud, basically. And basically what she's done is they've acquired those assets and
put it into Skyvera.
Well, but it kind of is Skyvera.
I
think,
see, right.
Because that's what Skyvera is doing.
Well, that's where I always get a little bit, and I'm not saying anything conclusively one way or the other, but when you start getting companies and holding companies and all that sort of thing, I was like, what the hell's going on here?
It kind of is Skyvera, and I'm guessing this wasn't said in the press release either, but I'm guessing Totogi just becomes a part of that. It becomes a part of that kind of structure, and what its job will be is to just basically carry on doing what Skyvera is doing, which is to go around but spending this $1 billion that it's got on creating. I mean, I think its mission. I think Zephatel's mission was we want to build an end-to-end kind of stack, whatever they call it.
Well, that's what I'm still, again, from the press release, and I haven't spoken to Danielle about this. I wasn't that sure from the press release what, and I still wasn't. These are questions. If the podcast was more properly journalistic and interrogative, I probably would have prepared these questions when she was on and asked her. Just wondering
that would have been too early for this, though, anyway. But
but just generally what her thing is, because it's been known that she's got serious backing for a while. She was able to splash all that cash at Mobile World Congress and all that sort of thing. Just working out what the ultimate endpoint, what's the exit strategy, what is the strategic point of it all, and all I can describe it as is a sort of massive incubator.
It's an incubator, and I think they obviously see the public cloud and software companies that are designing for the public cloud as a massive growth opportunity.
Yeah, which it probably is.
And they've got Totogi's a charger, and they're basically trying to fill other bits of the piece.
But then do what with them?
With BSS OSS? Well, they have a full. Do what with them? Sell stuff to telcos and basically take business away from the legacy.
But then is there going to be some kind of advantage to them owning the full stack? Do you think they'll end up selling a sort of
that's a
plug and play full Monty type of thing?
I don't know on that, but at least they have all the boxes ticked. I mean, whether they try and I don't think they'd say that you have to buy everything or nothing, because that's not really how operators want to do things these days. In fact, companies that have gone down that route have sort of. So it's that choice between best of breed and best of suite, isn't it? But increasingly, it seems operators want to be able to do best of the one where you. They're both such weird expressions. I get them mixed up. But the one where you can basically just buy bits and not buy the whole. So I'm guessing best of
suite, maybe.
They're horrible. They're horrible at space. But one of them anyway describes just going and buying everything in one go.
Yeah.
And it's difficult to do otherwise. And one of them is where you can just buy bits and pieces, and you get the best of each thing, if you see what I mean. Because a company might have a full stack, but there's bits of its stack which aren't as good as other bits of the stack.
So again, that makes me wonder whether Telco.dr /Skyvera / whatever the fuck we call it around. Do you know, I'm just going to call it Telco.dr now.
Yeah.
Because I got bored of all these other company names.
Telco.dr then.
Or just call it Danielle's thing.
Right.
Is Danielle's thing, what's it going to be to other people? Is it going to be like a shop window where you can go, oh yeah, that looks quite handy, or whatever? Or is it going to be more of an incubator where they've got all these clever different public cloud stakeholders together to create some new bit of even better public cloud compatible stuff? It's just still not that clear to me what the point of it is, both in terms of, how is this $1 billion that she's got to spend on it. Presumably she wants to turn it to $2 billion one day. It's not obvious to me what the business case is there, or what a telecom stakeholder gets from her that isn't being provided from someone else. That's all.
Yeah.
Other than that, I'll get it.
Well, she would. What a telecom stakeholder. I mean, they obviously have the view that the market needs to move to the public cloud, don't they? I mean, the exit strategy, how exactly they're going to dispose of assets if they are at some point, and all that stuff, and all those details. I agree. Those are big questions, but they clearly believe.
I'm just saying.
They clearly believe this is a market ripe for disruption. This has been a message all along. Telecom's been very, very slow to move to the public cloud. If it doesn't move to the public cloud quickly, it's going to be like companies are going to be screwed. Totogi does things that are in a much, much better than any of the other charger stuff that you can get on the market at the moment.
Does it?
This is what they will be saying.
Right.
Therefore, it's a huge opportunity for growth. And why wouldn't you invest in companies like that? Now, the details of how it's going to play out, I don't know. But that's their sort of
and I
mission.
guess that's just what I'm going to. Each time they come out with an announcement, if I choose to cover it, if I don't if I don't feel some of those things are sort of addressed, I'm just going to ask the question for no reason other than that I just don't know the answer myself, and it's my job to be curious.
Yeah.
But what was I going to say? Yeah, I mean, I suppose it does all feed into that telco cloud thing, the public cloud thing.
Yeah.
Which is why Danielle will keep getting brought up in conversation, because it's an overarching, I don't know if meta narrative is the right word, but a broad narrative about this. So we've had the Vodafone stuff where they're a bit like, well, hold on, let's just calm down a little bit. We've got Danielle who's just full on gung ho. Although on the pod, as we commented probably on previous pods, she was surprisingly contrite about the downsides. I'm not going to lie to you. It's not all groovy, but she's almost sort of brutal about it, as saying, the downsides, but what are your choices?
Well, I take her point on that because, and I wrote something on Netflix this week, a sort of opinionated piece about.
Expand on that.
Well, I mean, because Netflix came out with results this week, and it's been in the news a lot recently because everybody's getting worked up about net neutrality all of a sudden because one of its shows is apparently taken off, and it's more pressure on networks and who pays for all of that. So they've been very much in the in the news headlines, I think. One of the interesting things about them that gets overlooked, I think, a lot is their own relationship with the public cloud, and they're incredibly invested in AWS.
They must be one of its biggest customers.
Well, I heard that they're actually AWS's biggest customer.
Right, it doesn't surprise me.
Now, this is if you go to their SEC filings from only quite recently, they say this is how they put it. They run the vast majority of their computing on AWS, and they use it for data processing, storage, and other services. Any disruption of or interference with, English is a bit weird.
This is the sort of shit could go wrong part of the filing.
Of AWS would impact our operations, and our business would be adversely impacted. And you sort of think, well, okay, any supply disruption is bad, but this is why companies have redundancy in there, and they have other options. And you read the bit that says the vast majority is on AWS, and you think, well, they haven't really got that covered, have they? And then they go on to say, this is this acknowledgement here that we cannot easily switch our AWS operations to another cloud provider. And it's not just Netflix saying this. I mean, you go through a lot of the sort of tech companies that don't belong to FANG, if you like, the massive ones. So companies like Snapchat. I mean, they're even more blunt about it. Now, they do have two companies in the mix. They've got Google Cloud, and this is actually one of the things that was mentioned that Vodafone do, because there was another journalist asking questions quite aggressively.
Oh, that was one thing I wanted to mention about it. God damn. A couple of more tech side rather than Telecoms side.
He was a software person. And
and they were getting stuck in, and that's fine, ask tough questions, but they were so long, some of their questions. I hate those long declarative questions.
Yeah. I mean, he was basically saying... because they were saying, well, we use Google, we use Microsoft, and we use AWS, and therefore we've got. I think Johan Weiberg started by saying that we're not overly reliant on any one of them, and he made the very reasonable point that, well, but if you only take specific things from each of them, you kind of are reliant on them. It's a bit like
For
Open RAN. If you're getting all of your processors from Intel, and another bit, and all the software comes from Altiostar, then you've almost got more vulnerabilities there, haven't you? Because you've got several companies that you only rely on for that one thing.
Can you just bring AMD in or Qualcomm in?
And this is what Snap did exactly the same thing. So it uses AWS and Google, and then it goes, our systems are not fully redundant on the two platforms. Any transition of the cloud services currently provided by either Google or AWS to the other platform or to another cloud provider would be difficult to implement and will cause us to incur significant time and expense. This is how much they're spending, by the way. This is quite interesting because they put this all in their SEC filing.
Now?
This is Snap. Snap's signed a commitment to spend $2 billion with Google Cloud over 5 years and 1.1 billion with AWS over 6 years, which, if you work it out, is about 580 million a year. That's 23% of their revenues.
Wow.
And last year they ran up a $945 million loss. So they have an enormous... I mean, to be spending...
more than half of their loss, you could say.
Almost a quarter of their money, their sales goes on those two providers.
Yes.
And and their costs are going up. There were also, so this is another thing I was saying, costs will continue to increase as the user base goes up. It's sort of matched to traffic growth. So
when you don't think about it, do you? When you're sitting there dicking about on an app, you don't, even I don't know about you, I can only speak for myself, I don't think about all the infrastructure that enables me to dick about on Twitter on my phone.
Yeah.
But it pretty much always works.
Yeah.
And it's actually really expensive to make sure it pretty much always works on my phone.
But then you're thinking, well, why have they done it? Why have they created this risk? And why are companies like AT&T, for instance, so keen to go and use Microsoft Azure for all their 5G stuff? And you sort of think, well, this is where I kind of agree with Danielle Royston, that she is saying if you don't take advantage of the public cloud in some way, and other people are doing, your competitors are doing, then there's going to come a point potentially, if all this stuff is true about how much more efficient it is to do things that way, then at some point you've got an inefficient operation that's going to start losing. And no CEO wants to be dragged in front of his board and said, you've become unprofitable because you didn't adapt to technological change.
Well, and a bit of it comes back to that 80s cliche, if you don't get fired for buying IBM.
Yeah, it's the same thing, actually.
But yes, so it comes down to that fundamental thing. So you've said that Snap is committed to spend $10 zillion on the public cloud over the next few years. But would it spend $20 zillion on private cloud, on its own server infrastructure and that kind of shit?
Yeah.
So it's less about the sums involved than the comparison, the relative sums involved. And I bet that the AWS salespeople know that. So you wonder whether they could drop their pants a bit. I suppose my biggest concern is how competitive are they? There's 3 US tech giants, basically, isn't it?
Yeah.
In the public cloud space.
I mean, there's 3 that are dominant. There are, you can get stuff from IBM and Oracle are the other ones that get mentioned. And then
Danielle won't have that. And Danielle won't have it that IBM's even a proper public cloud, will she?
No, but both of them are a lot smaller than the other ones anyway. I think.
And you got Oracle.
I mean, I think one of them, Oracle, does quite well in the government sector, as I understand it. And then in China, you've got Alibaba and everything.
Well,
but
China does its own thing, which we'll come on to.
I mean, that's never going to be an option, I don't think, for companies in other parts in a lot of other parts of the world. But
did you hear that thing about LinkedIn pulling out of China?
No.
Well, hold on to that. Remind me to bring it up when we talk about China in a second.
The other thing I was going to say about the Netflix thing I wrote, and also linking it to the Vodafone discussion, is, and we've talked about this a lot, outages. It's one of the issues, isn't it? Obviously, if you put everything into one
and
cloud,
redundancy and so on.
Or if you have everything on any one supplier and they run into problems, you're kind of screwed. And you sort of think, well, AWS, Google, Microsoft, they're so big, they could never have problems, could they? They're going to be on top of all this stuff that's been affecting other companies. Well, the Facebook, outage that lasted 7 hours. I was chatting to Scott Petty about this, and he said one of the lessons that needs to come out of this is that no company's sort of too big to have those problems.
And Facebook,
and that was human error. He was saying. I mean, we sort of speculated that.
Yeah, I think
that
so.
Before,
there was some kind of configuration thing, but
a configuration cock up. And he was saying,
and Facebook's got loads of its own cloud infrastructure. I don't know how dependent on the others.
But it's besides
I remember
the
press
point.
Releases years ago about Facebook building data centers the size of Wales or whatever.
Yeah, but if it's the 6th biggest company in the world or whatever, in terms of market cap.
Yeah.
So if it can happen to internet problems,
however that happens,
and technological problems can happen to Facebook, they
and
can
all
happen
of
to
its
anybody
services as well.
And
so there isn't even redundancy across service. It's
and so if the same thing happened at AWS, and then he was sort of nodding his head when I was saying this, it could be with all the companies that use AWS for systems, it could be catastrophic.
So then you get into the tricky situation of how do you explain to investors and shareholders that redundancy is good, because there's nothing sexy or profitable or fun about redundancy.
Yeah, it's a good point.
And I suppose that's why they have that little bit of their filings. But that's never going to affect your share price in a positive way. We've built in a bit more redundancy.
Things like that always get overlooked, don't they, to be honest, by the investment community. I mean, that's the sort of thing that we need to worry about and governments need to worry about. And hopefully the CTOs are thinking about that and everything. But yeah, the investors, it's hard to sell them on you should buy more. You should buy alternative servers and make sure that you've got several suppliers in the mix. And I suppose this is one of the reasons why it's not just the cloud. You go back to the RAN stuff that we talk about lots on this podcast. And this is one of the reasons why so many people went all in with Huawei, isn't it? You had deals in some countries in Europe where Huawei was the only radio access network vendor to that operator. You look at it now, and it's kind of a crazy situation to be in, and it's costing some of them a lot of money to sort of move to.
Yeah.
But it's probably easier to do that than it is to move to another cloud. This is the thing.
Yes, and to draw a line on this before I move it on, one of the points I think Danielle tried to make when we got on the podcast is, the tricky bit is getting all cloudified. Once you're cloudified, a lot of the hard work should be done, but I'm not so sure about that for all the reasons we just discussed.
Yeah.
Because there isn't middleware, there isn't this clear pathway from moving to one to the other. I'm not a software engineer.
Let's see.
I'm like
what
the
Vodafone
opposite of a
does.
software engineer. I wouldn't know software if it bit me on the arse.
Well, I don't either.
But anecdotally, it does seem to be not straightforward.
Exactly.
So, and what does concern me, and what I do know a little bit more about, is sort of market dynamics and competition and that sort of thing. And there's ostensibly competition, an oligopoly in the public cloud of Amazon, Google, and Microsoft.
Yeah.
But if it's really difficult to move between them, that's not really a competition, is it? That's not really a dynamic, competitive environment.
Exactly, and I'm the same as you. I don't know this is why I try and steer away from too much jargon, and you steer away from jargon anyway as a journalist, but you've got to be quite careful about how you write about some of this stuff, I think.
Yeah,
when they're
certainly
talking
not to expose yourself as
when they're
just being
talking
a
about
dilettante.
Developing tools that allow them to move between the clouds. I mean, I don't know how that would work and how easy it is to do, but certainly the aspiration, I think, is important, and if they can pull it off, then that's probably the sort of thing that more companies should be thinking about.
Well, in a really sophisticated, joined-up world, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, etc., would get together and go, look, let's all make it easier to change between us. I know that will be bad. I know we'll lose some business to each other, but the rising tide will lift all ships.
Yeah.
And if we eliminate some of the peril, some of the risk associated with getting into the public cloud, it will benefit all of us.
Yeah, but they only think about that when they're in trouble, don't they? Companies only think that way when they're in trouble. That's what the whole telecom sector is all about this. So we need to get together and sort our problems out together, otherwise we're all screwed. Amazon and Google and Microsoft, they're laughing. They don't think about things that way. So
they're all good.
Yeah.
They're just spending their spare money.
They all
on
hate
rockets
each other
and
more
shit.
than ever now. In fact, the more successful they get, the more they start to fall out with each other.
Well, that's good. A bit of animosity is another form of competition, isn't it? Okay. So the final thing I wanted to talk about.
Got another beer in the meantime
Yeah.
before you get onto that.
So
Seems like a good time to.
we've got a bottle of Star. We've got some
Oh, that's too much.
gluten-free stuff.
No.
And we've got a Hell Yes.
Oh,
But that's
Yeah.
quite a big one.
all right. Oh, the hell yes.
Oh,
It's not as big as the Star, is it?
No, this isn't
It's
a Daniel
bigger.
Star. This is a
Oh,
little Star.
I'll have a Star then if you've got an opener.
We just need Pierre's opener. Because I keep needing to go on Amazon and get a
Yeah.
better opener. My opener's so
Normally,
shit.
beer and the mechanics of
Can you do
beer
it?
don't come up as much on the podcast, do they? But
No, what do you know? I noticed
that
it
you've got your Yeti,
editing the
it's-
Amsterdam podcast when it was in the morning. We weren't drinking. There's so much less swearing and general gobshitery.
You're also in
oh,
public.
we had
so
we had
maybe-
we had
We're also in
Dario on
public.
as well. Yes,
And we had Dario. It's just a different dynamic.
Yeah.
Anyway, so yeah, I just wrote a thing quickly. Like on Fridays, I have to write fairly short and sweet stories because I have to get that done, get the other stories up, sort my life out, and get over here for the pod. And also, I had to get over here for a bit of job interviewing. Hopefully, we can have another Telecoms.com person before long who might even be on the pod. So that would be good. They won't replace you though, Ian. You're irreplaceable. You're the only one who gives us actual legitimacy in terms of knowing what you're talking about.
You can replace me if you want. I'm not.
No.
I'll just come in for a beer afterwards.
Me and someone who knows no more than I do about telecoms will be a disaster. Anyway, so yes, I wrote this quickly, and the headline was US Huawei blacklist revealed to be pointless. And there's a degree, as there always often is with my headline writing, a degree of sort of
Hyperbole.
Yeah, hyperbole and journalistic license, but the basis of it was channelizing a Reuters report that said, let's click through on the Reuters report. So I always linked up. Do you ever look at some other journalistic sites when they're channelizing? So by journalism, I mean re-reporting another person's report as opposed to getting all the information by myself. And that's fine. It's fairly commonplace, and I admit it when I do it. But some people, when they channelise, don't link to the source. I think that's fucking poor form.
Yeah, it's poor form. What's even poorer form is not even acknowledging the source, which I've seen happen before.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah.
Or even poorer form.
I've even seen it happen to my own stuff.
Yeah,
a couple of times.
Well, I've had times when people have written something up and they've copied and pasted my.
So I've had that as well. In fact, on quite a well-known site recently that I won't mention here.
Really?
But yeah, I'll tell you about it afterwards.
Tell me after. Good thing I'm not more pissed. I'd get it out of you and
No,
name and shame.
I wouldn't do it here. But
I'll bleep it.
Yeah, you'd bleep it. No, that's crossing a line, isn't it?
You can say it now and then I'll bleep it and you can react to it.
No, don't worry. Let's not go there. You might forget to bleep it. You might not. You might on Monday morning not bother to get to the end of the pod and then forget to bleep it. Yeah. Anyway, so the Huawei, the Reuters headline was Huawei, SMIC suppliers receive billions worth of licensing for US goods, and basically there's the US House of Representatives Foreign Affairs. So House of Representatives is like House of Commons, I think, roughly.
yeah.
And their Foreign Affairs Committee just sort of voted to grant a request to release this information. And the long and short of it is, from the Reuters report, according to documents obtained by Reuters, that's their little clause saying we got here first, so calm down. 113 export licenses worth $61 billion were approved for suppliers to ship products to Huawei, and this is between November last year and April this year.
Yeah.
Now, the reason I think it's interesting, so this blacklist, this is a Trump thing. This is a typical Trump thing, is going, we'll fucking blacklist them, kick their ass, and that's his sort of crude diplomacy, which I actually don't necessarily have a massive problem with, because in contrast to the sort of more suave, understated diplomacy of someone like Barack Obama, seemed to yield more results.
Yeah.
In terms of sort of, I don't know.
Well, it screwed them up.
Well, it was a statement of, I think sometimes in terms of geopolitics, you got strongmen, you've got despots, you've got people who are ruling absolutely and have presumably got massive egos to go with it.
Yeah.
Sometimes the only language they understand is just sort of good old alpha male hard-ass talk. And that's something Trump, for all his many manifest failings, was quite good at. Whereas maybe someone like Barack Obama was a bit too sort of suave and understated for his own good. Fuck knows. I don't know what it's like being up at that level. But anyway, so he came out with this blacklist, which meant that Huawei, SMIC, which is a chip fab, and other Chinese companies, American companies couldn't do business with them.
Yeah.
And that was a definite escalation of the aggro. As we know, Trump has used Huawei as a sort of proxy to get at China, at CCP, at Xi Jinping. But then it turns out, but then when they came out with it, all these American companies are going, hold on a sec, we do a lot of business with Huawei, you're kind of fucking us over here, Don.
Yeah.
Can you throw us a bone? And you go, okay, we'll have special licenses for people, and give them a chance to sort of wean themselves off Huawei or something. Turns out they're chucking these licenses around like confetti. And to me, it just says that the whole thing was just symbolic. It was just hot air. And in practice, the whole thing was just completely diluted, if not utterly undermined, by the fact that loads of exemptions were granted, which again, I don't necessarily have a problem with, because I wasn't a big fan of the blacklisting in the first place.
Yeah.
But that was what I took from it.
I think people have been able to find loopholes, and they've been able to. I went to. There's quite a well-known company, even though it's tiny, called Neophotonics, which sort of got thrown into the spotlight simply because it's really key for optical components, and they came up when ZTE was also on the entity list, that not being able to get stuff from them was bad news, and Huawei was a massive customer of theirs, I think. So there was a lot of focus on how it would affect them. And then you look at their filings recently, and they say they're still shipping to Huawei, but it's just quite a lot less than what they sold before. So I think some companies have found sort of loopholes that have allowed them to sell legacy products and certain other things, and that's allowed them to carry on doing business. But I don't have any doubt that the entity list has had a massive impact on Huawei, because and one thing that I'm pretty clear that who hasn't got any way around this, because they've been quite clear about it on earnings call lots of times, is TSMC, which doesn't ship anything to Huawei anymore, and that to be quite honest with you is enough to screw you up. If you can't get your chips from TSMC,
and that's even more bizarre because TSMC is a Taiwanese company.
Yeah, but it uses American equipment,
exactly.
So it's subject to sanctions.
So I do wonder about that. I'm not in any way doubting what you've just said. So American companies can get these exemptions, but TSMC
but maybe
can't.
This is maybe this is what America's thinking, though. Maybe they're thinking, well, okay, we'll be tough on TSMC and they're not going to get any exemptions and ways around this.
But we'll take care of our own lads.
And we know that that's enough, basically, to screw up Huawei, because 85% of the world's top-end chips come from TSMC. If you can't get your 5-nanometer stuff for your smartphones, if you can't get your 7 to 10 nanometer stuff for your 5G kit, you're in real trouble.
Yeah.
That's the hard stuff that's actually produced. Forget about designs and anything else. It's good. All these chip companies in America that that have these whizzy designs, it all goes through TSMC and gets produced.
Like Qualcomm, Apple,
and not everybody, but there's a huge amount that goes that way. If they can't get stuff from TSMC, then there's not really an alternative, because who else is there? There's Samsung, which, to be honest, I think it's in the same situation. And Intel. No, there isn't Intel, because Intel's behind. And
it's also not necessarily geared to sort of mobile chips versus PC and server chips.
Yeah, but they do supply chips for network equipment. So
right. I was thinking mobile. I was thinking like the application
the devices,
inside phones.
Yeah, So I've no doubt that it's had a massive. And then you look at what Huawei say. I mean, you only have to look at its smartphone results to see how much it's suffered. Yeah. It can't put Google on its smartphones.
Didn't we have someone put a bitchy comment on the pod when we were talking about the Huawei stuff? Someone who seemed to be sympathetic to Huawei didn't like that pod. He's like, "What the fuck you talking about?"
Yes.
Anyway, sorry.
I think he works for Huawei.
Yeah.
But they can't put. I mean, I've even seen this in practice, actually, because my mum got a Huawei phone when I advised her not to, not that long before the things were coming into play, and then she couldn't use any Google stuff on it after a while. It just stopped working.
Oh my God.
And then the provider.
I bet she still blamed you.
The provider was good enough. Might as well mention him because I'm saying nice things. EE was good enough to actually swap it for a Samsung phone.
Well, okay,
no.
good for them.
And now she can sort of use things, it's obviously had an impact. And I was talking to Scott Petty's become my source of like loads of information just from having.
Sounds like you had a really good chat with him.
Well, I was chatting to him about that. I was sat next to him, but I brought up Huawei a bit, and he was saying that you can see that they're under pressure on the supply side of things. That there will come a point when. I mean, he said that they've stockpiled a lot. Was his view? They'd stockpiled a lot,
but
and there's going to come a point. I think they've used it up on the phones, but the swap out times on equipment are much slower. So potentially, I think they have more sort of built in, where they can sort of carry on going for longer before they run into problems. But I think there's ways around it, and they've probably a lot of business has been done. But I still think that this whole pivot that they've had to make towards designing software for cars, and trying to be a cloud computing company and trying to do 5G applications for mines has come out of the problems they've had. And you only have to look at their financial performance that they've reported recently to see that they're having. I mean, they used to be on this sort of like that sort of growth trajectory going up like a roller coaster before it goes down the Big Dipper, and they're all of a sudden like either flat or going down a lot with the sort of handset area. I don't know. I think things still look really bad for them despite this.
Yeah, I mean, no, I don't question that American aggressive action has been effective when it comes to Huawei. The two things, as we've spoken about many times before, the two things I'm not so comfortable about is I don't know to what extent Huawei deserves it.
No.
And then, I'm just going to read my sort of concluding paragraph. So bear in mind the theme of my write-up today was just that this particular blacklisting looks like a bit of a fucking waste of time. And notwithstanding your excellent rebuttals to that generalisation, I said in my final paragraph, hopefully a positive consequence of this revelation will be the understanding that geopolitical grandstanding is counterproductive. It's possible that Trump's war on Huawei did serve notice to the Chinese Communist Party that the US is drawing a line in the sand with respect to suspected excessive intimacy between the public and private sector over there, but it was at best symbolic. In practice, trade will always find a way, and future geopolitical policy should be made with that in mind. And my point of that is, trade's trade.
Yeah.
It's not for Donald Trump, really, to tell us who we can buy shit off.
Yeah.
It is for Donald Trump or Joe Biden or whoever to step in when they think China's taking a piss, or there's industrial espionage, or they're using Huawei as some kind of backdoor for spying.
Yeah.
Which again we've yet to see really strong evidence of.
I think the problem with what they've done here, on the sort of sanctions side, is that maybe in the short term it's made things really really tough for Huawei, and it's resulted in this sort of pivot to software and other things. But it's also made China even more determined that it has to be self-reliant.
Yeah.
And a country like that will acquire these capabilities. There's the things that America does really well in terms of chip design, and things that other countries do really well in terms of intellectual property are not off limits to China. You talk to analysts, they say it'll take 4 or 5 years for them to acquire.
Well, and
the
they've got great
capability.
universities. I'll tell you what, Vodafone wants to find 1,000 software engineers.
Yeah,
they could find them no problem in China.
Well, yeah, I just think that it will, and then the trouble is what you've done is you've forced China to become more self-reliant. So this money it used to spend with American companies that meant American companies were quite profitable and successful. Some of them, like Neophotonics, isn't there anymore because they've got their own domestic alternatives.
That's trade.
Yeah,
trade is about flow of money.
That's the downside. You just result in a sort of bypassing of American expertise. Let's not forget China is bloody huge, yeah? 1.4 billion people. You only have to look at Ericsson's issues with loss of market. I mean, we didn't talk about Ericsson's earnings, but the whole China thing came up on those again this week because, they've lost market share this year with the 5G contracts. There's a retaliation, really, I think, against
and their top line is
ban.
that their revenues were down 1%, but if it wasn't for the China stuff, they would have been up 6%.
They'd have been up 6%. They were up 6%, I think, excluding China organically, like cutting out foreign exchange effects. But their reported number was down 1%, which isn't that bad. But the China business is just disappearing really quickly now. They've gone down from, I think, a 10% market share last year among all the operators to 3% this year. And in a country where they build hundreds and hundreds of thousands of base stations out every year, it's a massive amount of money. It accounts for a really big share.
It's easily the biggest single country market.
I think it was 8% of revenues for Huawei. For Ericsson, and let's remember Ericsson serves just about every country in the world, it seems.
Mm-hmm.
So, and they're at 8% of revenues. Then America would be bigger, but
so now Ericsson's almost totally reliant on the Americas and Europe for the majority of its revenue.
Well, it's got a lot of business in other Asian countries like Japan. They do really well in Japan, but
just thinking of the bar chart from their quarterlies, it was quite heavy on the Americas and
it's
Western
affected.
Europe.
They've had to cut a lot of jobs in China. That's something that's happening at the moment. It's slowed down some of the progress that they wanted to make on turning around digital services because that business has been hit. So it's had an impact.
Yeah,
and then they've expressed concern about this whole geopolitical rift that's developing. The risk of
Ekholm's been
pleading
very clear
for
everyone to calm down for ages.
Yeah.
And I'm with Ekholm on that. It's tough. I'm not going to get into all the other accusations that are thrown at China, but obviously, and every now and then, God, what was it? The FT had something about them launching some fucking new missile, and everyone was shitting themselves earlier on this week. And I think I mentioned it on the pod before. You got Neil Ferguson saying how we're in sort of Cold War II, and maybe we are, and maybe some kind of Cold War, which let's not forget is better than the Hot War, is inevitable.
Well, did you see Biden's comments today?
No.
Or last night. This is getting off topic slightly,
That's
but
right.
some
once we've done there, I'll wrap it up.
Some journalists asked him the Taiwan question, which I think American presidents normally duck and just sort of come out with some.
Because it's so triggering to China.
Would you defend Taiwan if China attacked? And he said, yes, definitely.
Just straight up.
Yeah. And then they asked him again, and he said, yeah, we'll come to their defence, which is quite. And then apparently his aides had to come out and say, there's no change in the American position. There's no change in the American position.
His aides had to come out and give him a little pill.
He doesn't know what he's talking about.
Yeah. And then he starts shaking his walking stick and go, fuck China.
I don't know who it was which media outlet it was interviewing him, but it must have been one of the big ones, obviously, because you don't get to interview Biden if you're from light reading. So,
Not yet.
Well, you don't get to interview Biden if you're from anywhere.
yeah, exactly.
On the whole,
yeah.
but that's another matter. Okay, I'm going to wrap it up because we're over time already. I mean, my feelings about all this sort of geopolitical stuff is there's a part of me that's pleased that a line's been drawn in the sand, because sometimes you've got to demonstrate strength, and Western politicians can be a bit sort of weak, can be a bit sort of prevaricating and all that, and sometimes the only language people understand, whether it's Xi Jinping or whether it's Vladimir Putin or whether it's Erdogan in Turkey or whatever.
All those lovely fellas.
Yeah, but they are what they are. I don't even judge them. I mean, being a strong man in inverted commas is an approach to politics.
Yeah.
And another approach to politics is to be more diplomatic and more touchy-feely. I'm not even making a call as to which is better. But I think you've got to recognise a strong man, because they generally are men, and you've got to speak their language. So I don't mind that we've got stuck in and we've rolled our sleeves up and we've collectively shown we're prepared to, we're not complete pushovers. But then it's such a delicate balancing act, isn't it? Because when you overdo it, and then you get this tit for tat, and I've banned this, so they're going to ban that, and I've got this tariff, so there's a retaliatory tariff, and all that sort of thing. Then it suddenly turns into bullshit, and everyone gets harmed.
Yeah.
And I just think, for me personally, if I could fine tune the whole thing, I think we've done well so far. But then we've got to a stage where we could overdo it. Everyone in the back of their mind who reads like current affairs is a bit like, fucking hell. Any day now I could be reading the news that China's invaded Taiwan, and then the whole world's in another world war.
Yeah.
And God knows what a world war would look like now versus fucking 70 years ago.
Yeah.
So I just sort of kind of hope that everyone can just wind their neck in a little bit. China can go, yeah, all right, fair enough. And America can go, okay, we've shown you we're not fucking around. But then everyone just retreats back and just gets on with it and continues trading with each other and doing their thing. There's just no need for it.
Yep.
No one's trying to tell. I mean, obviously we get stuff about like Xinjiang and other bits where China's approach to human rights is far below the standard we set for ourselves. But that's been happening forever, like Tibet and that sort of thing. I'm not saying I condone any of it, but we've always let it go pragmatically in the name of trade and international diplomacy in the past. And we can't go. We've seen in the Middle East and all that sort of. Much as we'd love to be the world police and go poking our nose in and going, oh no, Afghanistan, Taliban, you're bad. We're going to invade you to make sure you don't do badness anymore. We're going to invade Iraq, make sure you don't. It's never worked out, has it?
No.
So we do have to get to a point where we just go, all right, the world's the world. There can be some countries that just look mental from our point of view, but it's not our business to change them, just as it's not their business to change us. So I guess I'm a little bit isolationist in that way, while also wanting to keep trading with everyone. And I suppose there has to be some kind of line drawn in the sand, like if China does something really awful,
Yeah.
the international community's got to have the capacity to go, nah, you've done it now. But right now, I would just like everyone to just de-escalate a little bit and just get back to business as usual, especially after the pandemic and all that. Everyone just wants to make some money now.
We all want that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So let's not overcomplicate these things. Cool. All right. I think I'll leave it there. Is that all right?
Yep. Goodbye me.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, thanks a lot for listening, and make sure you join us for the next one.